Today's story is about a guy whose girlfriend got caught cheating, laughed about it out loud, and then delivered a full monologue about how he should basically be grateful. Her words, not mine. She told him he'd never find anyone like her again. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He left. And about a year later, he's standing in Brussels, Belgium, not some suburb, watching his new girlfriend do a fashion shoot for a European campaign. She'd had a crush on him since high school, by the way. I promise this one is worth every minute. Let's get into it. My girlfriend got caught cheating and told me I'd never find anyone like her. A year later, I was in Brussels with the model who'd had a crush on me since high school. I met Chloe on a dating app. Not one of those low-effort swipe-for-a-night apps. One of the ones where people write actual bios and claim they want something real. I was 33. She was 30. We matched, started talking, and it clicked immediately. Same sense of humor, overlapping interests, conversations that didn't run out of gas after 2 exchanges. That's genuinely rare, and I knew it. We did the online thing for a few weeks before I asked her out. I was nervous going into it. She was gorgeous in a way that made me pause and rethink a few things before the date. Not in a I don't deserve this spiral. More like I'd been around long enough to know that women who look like that tend to have a different experience of dating than the rest of us. Lots of options. Constant attention. A different set of calculations running in the background. I went into it trying not to project too far ahead and just enjoy it for what it was. First date was great. Better than expected, actually. Whatever we'd built over those weeks online wasn't just a product of the medium. It translated completely in person. She was warm, genuinely funny, and seemed interested in me specifically, not just in having someone around. That distinction matters more than people give it credit for. We made each other laugh without trying. Conversation moved naturally from one thing to the next, without those dead patches where you can tell someone's just buying time until the check comes. At the end of the night, I sat in my car for a few minutes before driving home, kind of just taking it all in. I didn't want to make too much of it, but it was good. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Made it official faster than I usually do, within about 6 weeks, which for me is quick. She worked in project coordination at a mid-sized consulting firm downtown. I was in operations management at a distribution company. Not glamorous, but steady, and I was good at it. We were both people who actually kept plans, showed up when they said they would, didn't need to be chased for a text back. That sounds like the bare minimum, but at 33 you start appreciating the bare minimum a lot more than you did at 25. For the first several months, things were genuinely easy, comfortable in a way that didn't feel lazy. We still made effort, still planned things, still had real conversations about stuff that actually mattered. We moved in together around month 5 when her lease came up. Her stuff mixed well with mine, the place came together without much friction. I remember thinking at some point that this felt like something that was actually going to go somewhere real. My previous relationship had ended badly enough that I'd spent a while being pretty guarded about things, and Chloe was the first person in a couple of years who'd made me drop that. Looking back, I probably should have held on to a little more of it. The hall pass conversation happened somewhere around month 7. One of those late night things where you've covered everything worth covering and just start saying whatever. She brought it up. Said her pick was Justin Timberlake. I wasn't going to argue with that. Reasonable choice. But then she added something with this small smirk that I still remember pretty clearly. Honestly, I don't think there are many celebrities who'd say no to me either. Not as a joke, as a statement of fact. A thing she'd apparently already thought about and landed on. I laughed it off and we moved on to something else. But that comment stayed with me in a way I couldn't fully shake. It wasn't the content exactly, more the tone, the certainty of it. She'd always come across as grounded, not the type who needed to announce her own value out loud. This felt different, off in a way I couldn't quite name at the time. I filed it away and mostly let it go. But I didn't forget it. Things were solid for another couple of months. Then, somewhere around month 9 or 10, I started noticing small shifts. Barely anything at first. The kind of thing you can talk yourself out of once or twice without much effort. She started coming home from work later than usual. Not dramatically, just consistently. She used to walk in around 6, sometimes 6:15. Then it crept to 7:30, then close to 8, a couple of nights past 9, and the explanations were thin. Lost track of time. Ran into someone from college, we grabbed coffee. Traffic was a nightmare. Vague, short, no follow-up. Before, she'd walk in and give me the whole breakdown of her day, what she was working on, which coworker was being difficult, what she got for lunch. Now it was just these disconnected one-liners that didn't go anywhere. I tried not to make it into something. Told myself she was under pressure at work, that everyone has stretches like this, that I was reading into things because I was already a little on edge from having been burned before. But when I'd bring it up, gently, not accusatory, not making it into a whole thing, she'd snap. Not in the way someone snaps when they're guilty and scared, in the way someone snaps when they resent being questioned at all. She'd say I was being controlling, that I had trust issues, that she couldn't believe this was a conversation we were having. I'd back off because fighting every night over something I couldn't prove felt like a losing battle, and she'd already gotten defensive before I finished my sentence anyway. But backing off didn't quiet the gut feeling. It just gave it more room. I raised it directly twice. First time she said everything was fine. She was just going through a rough stretch at work. She'd try to be better about communicating. Second time she got a little emotional, apologized, said the stress had been building, and she hadn't meant to shut me out. Both times I wanted to believe her. I genuinely tried. But the stories she'd tell when she did come home late had started to feel hollow. Too much detail in some places, nothing at all in others. Eye contact that drifted at the moments when it should have been steady. I remember one specific night she said she'd stayed late for a going away thing for one of her coworkers. Gave me a whole story, names and everything, and I sat there and nodded and didn't believe a single word of it. Couldn't have explained exactly why. I just didn't. I spent about a week and a half going back and forth in my head about what to do next. I didn't want to blow up something real over a feeling, but I also wasn't going to spend the next several months pretending everything was fine while that feeling kept getting louder. So I made a decision. One Tuesday afternoon, wait, I think it was actually Wednesday. Doesn't matter. Point is, I left work a couple hours early, told my manager I had something to take care of, and drove across town to her office building. Parked on the street with a clear view of the main entrance, cut the engine, and waited. She came out at around 5:20, walked to her car, sat in it for a few minutes with her phone, not moving, not driving, then pulled out of the lot. I followed, kept 2 or 3 cars between us, nothing dramatic about it. She drove about 20 minutes into a residential neighborhood I didn't recognize and turned into the parking lot of a mid-size apartment complex. I pulled in at the far end and sat there. She went in through the main entrance, alone. I sat in that car for close to 2 hours. When she came back out, there was a guy with her. Mid-30s, average build, nobody you'd look at twice. They stood near her car for a few minutes, not arguing, not rushing anywhere. He put his arm around her. She leaned in. It was one of those moments where your brain processes what you're seeing a few seconds before the rest of you catches up. I had what I needed. I went back 2 more times over the next 10 days. Different days, same parking lot, same outcome. I want to be clear. I wasn't enjoying any of this. It wasn't some power trip. I just wasn't going to walk in there with what I'd seen on day 1 and have her turn it into a misunderstanding. I needed it to be undeniable. After the 3rd visit, it was. Pause for a second. For the listeners, this is me, not the OP. I need you to appreciate what just happened here. He didn't follow her once and detonate. He went back 2 more times just to be certain. Most guys either blow up on day 1 or convince themselves they imagined it. This man ran a 3-week confirmation process like he was building a legal case. That's not jealousy, that's discipline. That's someone who understands you don't make a permanent move on incomplete information. You know who else operates like that? The guy in every heist movie who spends 3 weeks casing the building before anybody touches a doorknob. Patient, methodical, already decided. The confrontation she's about to walk into? She has absolutely no idea. By the time I decided to actually say something, the hurt had mostly already moved through me. It had happened gradually over those 10 days of sitting in parking lots and waiting, not in one big wave but in smaller ones, each one a little less sharp than the last, until what was left was mostly just this quiet, flat certainty that it was over. I didn't need to be angry about it. I just needed to close it out. I waited until she got home on a Thursday. She walked in around 7:45, said she'd been held up finishing a project, dropped her bag by the door the way she always did. I told her I needed to talk. Something in my voice registered. She looked at me a second longer than usual, then sat down at the kitchen table without pushing back. I laid it all out calmly, told her I knew, told her I'd gone to her office, followed her to the apartment complex, been there 3 separate times over the past 2 weeks, that I'd watched her come and go, seen what I'd seen, and didn't need her to confirm anything because I already had more than enough. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't shaking. My voice was even the whole time. I just wanted her to understand that I wasn't guessing, and there was no point in a denial. She went quiet. But not the guilty, crumbling kind of quiet. More like she was running through her options, figuring out the angle. And then she did something I genuinely hadn't anticipated. She didn't apologize. She stood up, crossed her arms, and started talking. "So you want to leave me over this?" Not a question, a statement with an edge underneath it. It was physical. It didn't mean anything. "And you want to throw everything away over one mistake?" She let that hang there for a second. Then her voice shifted into something sharper and more deliberate. "Let's be real with each other. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? You've known this whole time you were lucky to have me. I give you everything and you can't give me one pass? You're really going to blow up our life over this?" She kept going. Something about how I should think carefully before walking away from something I'd never find again. Something about how I'd been punching above for the entirety of our relationship, and I should ask myself whether I really understood what I was giving up. Something about how once I settled down and thought about it clearly, I'd see I was overreacting. I stood there and let her finish every single sentence. When she was done, I told her exactly what I thought of her. Not a long speech, not a breakdown, just clear, direct, and permanent. Then I walked out, didn't grab a bag, didn't say anything else. Walked straight to my car, started the engine, and drove. Hold on, I'm jumping in because I cannot let that speech go by without saying something. She got caught. 3 separate visits worth of caught. Undeniable, confirmed, documented in his own head across 10 days. And her response was to stand up and deliver a lecture about gratitude. I'm calling her the valedictorian of terrible takes, and I am not walking that back. Because that whole monologue, that's the scene in every movie where the villain starts explaining why they've already won. Right before the next 5 minutes happen and everything collapses. She literally said, "Where do you think you're going to go?" to a man who was already at the door. Spoiler, he went to Brussels. With a model, but we'll get there. I spent the first night in a cheap motel off the highway. Small room, one of those parking lot facing windows with a view of the dumpsters, a mattress that had clearly abandoned its original purpose years ago. I tried the TV for a while, kept hitting the wrong button on the remote, which was held together with what I think was a hair tie. Eventually gave up and just laid there in the dark. I didn't sleep much. Went back over the confrontation in my head, not because I was second-guessing anything. The decision was already made and I wasn't undoing it, but because I could not get over the speech. The actual content of it. The confidence. I kept waiting for some version of it to come back to me that made even partial sense. Nothing did. She'd had every possible response available to her, and she'd picked that one. That was a choice. The next morning, I drove back to the apartment to grab essentials. Figured she'd be at work. She wasn't. She'd clearly had a rough night, too. You could see it on her. But the second I walked in, she composed herself and said, with this small, smug smile, "I knew you'd come back." I didn't respond. Went straight to the bedroom, packed a bag with clothes, my laptop, chargers, some documents I needed. She stood in the hallway the whole time and watched without saying much. When I was almost at the door, she said something under her breath. I didn't catch it. Didn't slow down to ask. The texts started that evening. The first few days they were dismissive. Short, almost amused, like she was watching a situation she expected to resolve itself on its own. She'd been through arguments with me before where I'd gone quiet for a few days and then come back, and I think she put this in the same category. This wasn't that, but she didn't know the difference yet. Then the tone gradually shifted. Fewer messages? Quieter. Eventually something more subdued and uncertain. I didn't respond to any of it. I'd found a short-term sublet through a coworker and stayed focused on getting settled. A few days later, I went back with a friend to collect the rest of my stuff. She looked genuinely rattled watching us load boxes. Like the physical reality of it had connected something that the argument hadn't managed to. She didn't say much, just stood in the kitchen and watched. Her last message before I blocked her read, "I hope you know you'll never find anyone like me again." I blocked her and didn't look back. The months after that were mostly about keeping my head down and getting back to baseline. New routine, new space, no chaos. I ate badly for about a month. There was a stretch in November where I was buying frozen meals in bulk and calling it fine. Work kept me occupied enough that I wasn't sitting around stewing. I wasn't trying to jump back into anything. I just needed to level out, and I let myself do that without rushing it. Then a buddy talked me into going to my 15-year high school reunion. I wasn't planning on it. I'm not really a nostalgia person, and high school wasn't some golden era I needed to revisit. But he kept pushing. Said a bunch of people I actually liked were going. Said it would be good for me to get out. Said I was becoming a monk, which was probably fair. Eventually, I said fine, got dressed, and showed up. It ended up being a genuinely good night. Better than I'd expected by a lot. People were relaxed in a way that a 10-year reunion usually isn't. Nobody posturing, nobody trying to prove anything, just adults who were glad to be somewhere outside their normal routine for an evening. I ran into a handful of old friends I hadn't seen in years and had real conversations. The kind where you're not just updating each other on your resume. I stood at the food table longer than I needed to because it was the first actual spread I'd sat down near in a while, and I wasn't going to waste it. Partway through the night, I spotted a woman named Gia across the room. We hadn't been close in school, but I knew her well enough. She'd been best friends with a girl named Veronica all the way through graduation, and apparently they'd stayed close after. Veronica had been in a couple of my classes back in the day. Tall, easy to be around, naturally cool in the kind of way that doesn't require anything from the people around her. After graduation, she went into modeling. Did well at it, magazines, commercial campaigns, brand work, the kind where if you follow fashion at all, you'd probably recognize her name. I went over to say hi to Gia, just to catch up for a few minutes. She was warm and had this wide grin going for the entire conversation. At some point, I said I was surprised Veronica hadn't made it. Gia's grin got wider. She hesitated for half a second and then said, "She's going to kill me for telling you this, but she's always had a thing for you. Since high school." I laughed. Figured she was messing with me. She was not messing with me. She explained that Veronica had specifically asked her to go to the reunion and check in on me. Her actual instructions apparently were something along the lines of, see if he's still around, find out if he looks okay, find out if he's with someone. Gia said she'd already texted Veronica a photo of me from across the room earlier that evening. I told her that was flattering, but realistically, there was no universe where Veronica had carried a thing for me from high school through a full modeling career. We'd been friendly, sure, but not particularly close. She'd been in a completely different orbit socially. Gia just shrugged. Believe what you want. She asked me to come. I spent the rest of the night acting like I wasn't thinking about it as much as I was. Wait. For the listeners, this is me, not the OP. I just need a second here. She told him he'd never find anyone like her again. 8 months later, a woman whose full-time career involves being photographed for European fashion campaigns sends a personal representative to a high school reunion, specifically to check if he's still attractive and available. I'm not saying the universe writes these things on purpose. I am absolutely saying the universe writes these things on purpose. And here's the part that gets me. They haven't even talked yet. Brussels is still coming. Just stay with me on this one. I sat with it for a couple of days after the reunion. Then I just went for it, found Veronica on Instagram and sent her a message. Kept it short, just said, hey, Gia mentioned she'd seen me at the reunion and passed it along, good to reconnect. Gave Gia a heads up that I'd done it so the message wouldn't disappear into a request folder she never checked. Then I waited. 4 days of nothing. By day 4, I'd basically let it go. Figured Gia had gotten excited and overstated things, or Veronica had been polite about it when they talked, but wasn't actually interested enough to follow through. On day 5, the reply came in. She was enthusiastic, not in a trying too hard way. Genuinely excited. Lots of words, catching up energy right out of the gate. We started going back and forth, and it felt immediately like two people who'd been meaning to have this conversation for a while and just hadn't gotten around to it. After a few days of that, she said she was tired of typing and asked if I wanted to switch to FaceTime. I had no objection to that. We started video calling almost every day. She was in Brussels at the time, working on a campaign for a European fashion brand. She'd show me around wherever she happened to be. Lobby of her hotel, a street she walked every morning to get to set. Once she propped her phone against something on a cafe table outside, and we talked for close to 2 hours while she ate, and I was technically supposed to be on a lunch break back home. Easy. No performance, no sense of anyone managing an impression. She asked genuine questions. She remembered what I'd told her the day before. She had opinions about things and wasn't afraid to push back on mine, which I appreciated more than I expected to. Just two people in completely different countries, figuring out they actually liked each other more than they'd expected. There was one video call somewhere around week 3 where she was having a bad day. Something had gone sideways on set, some logistical thing she was venting about. And I remember thinking midway through the conversation that this was the part of the dynamic that actually matters. Not the good days where everything's easy and both people are at their best. The days when someone's annoyed and tired and not performing anything. She was real in that call. Didn't try to pivot to something lighter or wrap it up when the vibe got a little heavy. Just talked through it and then moved on. I liked that a lot. After a few weeks of daily calls, the line between reconnecting and actually being together got blurry enough that I just asked her directly what we were doing. She laughed, not nervous, more like relieved someone had finally said it out loud, and told me she wanted more than just friends. I asked if she wanted to be my girlfriend. She said yes without hesitating. No, let's just see where this goes. No hedging, no condition attached to it. Just yes. The distance was the obvious problem. She traveled constantly for work, and I was stateside with my job and my routine. I'd done long distance once before in my late 20s, and it had been miserable. The kind where you're technically together, but you're really just trading resentment across time zones until someone finally says what you've both been thinking for months. I wasn't eager to go through that version again, but something about this felt different enough that I wasn't willing to let logistics be the reason it never got a real shot. So I looked up flights and booked one. I know how that sounds. Flying to Belgium to see a woman you've been video calling for 6 weeks? I don't have a clean defense for it other than sometimes you just know. Brussels is a beautiful city. Old architecture everywhere. Cobblestone streets that make your ankles work for it. Restaurants tucked into buildings that look like they've been there since the 1600s. But being there with Veronica was its own thing on top of all of that. She picked me up from the airport, and we spent the first day just walking around, getting used to being in the same physical space after weeks of a screen between us. We grabbed food at a place she liked near her hotel. Nothing fancy, just a corner spot with good coffee and sandwiches, and sat there for 3 hours just talking. By that evening, it felt completely natural. No awkward adjustment, no gap between who she was on camera and who she was in person. Same person. Easy. The second day, she brought me to one of her shoots. I stood off to the side and watched the whole operation. The setup, the lighting adjustments, the photographer making small calls while she moved through different setups. With this ease, I found genuinely impressive. It's a completely different world from what I do, which is mostly spreadsheets and logistics calls and moving numbers around on a calendar. Watching her work was something else entirely. Confident, professional, clearly skilled at something that required a lot more than just looking a certain way. There's a whole physical intelligence to it. The way she'd adjust her posture between frames, the way she'd find her mark without being told twice, the way she stayed relaxed during the longer setup periods, instead of getting visibly restless the way some people do when they're being watched. Between setups, she'd come over and sit with me for a few minutes, and we'd just talk quietly while the crew reset. Same person she'd been on every FaceTime. Grounded. No separate version of herself that required a different presentation. I took photos throughout the day. Nothing formal. Candids. The location. A couple of her laughing at something the photographer said. That evening back at the hotel, I posted a handful of them to my Instagram close friends story. Small group. People I actually kept in touch with. Didn't think twice about it. I definitely should have checked that list before posting. Yo, time out. Let me just take a second here to appreciate the full picture. A few months ago, this man was lying on a motel mattress at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, replaying a breakup speech in his head. Now he's at a fashion shoot in Belgium, taking candid photos from the sideline, like he's on a behind-the-scenes feature about his own comeback. I'm not saying life always works out like this. I'm saying it worked out spectacularly in this specific case. Anyway, he made one small administrative error right here. Left someone on a list they had absolutely no business being on. And that someone is about to spend 10 very uncomfortable minutes staring at a typing indicator trying to figure out what to say. Pull up a chair. Chloe messaged me a few hours after the post went up. We hadn't had any contact in close to a year. Her message said, "Who's that? Why are you playing groupie?" with a laughing emoji. Like it was a funny observation, like she was watching something amusing from a comfortable distance. I looked at it for a few seconds. Then I typed back, "That's my girlfriend." Nothing else. Put my phone face down on the nightstand. She was typing within 30 seconds. I could see the indicator pop up. Then it disappeared. Then it came back. Then it went away again. This kept going for close to 10 minutes. Whatever she was writing, she kept deleting it and starting over. Eventually, she sent, "Sure." I picked my phone back up. I wrote, "You don't have to believe me, but if you thought you were out of my league, Veronica's out of this world." Then I added one more line underneath. "How's your guy from back then doing anyway?" She read it. The receipt showed up immediately. No response came. I blocked her on Instagram and closed the app. Was it petty? A little, probably. I'll own that. But she'd spent the last year operating on the certainty that her parting line, "You'll never find anyone like me again," had lodged somewhere inside me and was doing exactly what she'd intended. I wanted her to know it hadn't. I wanted to close that door in a way that was final, not just quiet. "Okay, let me run the tape back one time." She said he'd never find anyone like her again. He found someone whose full-time career involves being photographed for campaigns that run on buildings in major European cities. She said he'd been punching above his weight. He went to Brussels. She asked, "Where do you think you're going to go?" And the answer turned out to be exactly where he wanted, on his own schedule, at his own pace. That final message was clean, the block was clean, and she spent 10 minutes trying to write back and couldn't finish it. That's not petty. That's just a very satisfying last word. Final update. Veronica and I have been together since Brussels. The distance worked itself out gradually. She's stateside more than half the year now, and I've gotten comfortable booking last-minute flights when she's not. It works. Better than anything I've had, honestly, and I've stopped being surprised by it. I think about what Chloe said sometimes. Not because it still has any weight, more because it's kind of funny in retrospect. She was so completely certain that she was the ceiling. That I should have been grateful for whatever I got, because the alternative was nothing worth having. Said it like she'd already done the math, and I just needed to catch up to her conclusion. I'm thinking about proposing before the end of the year. Don't tell Veronica. One thing I'll say, I genuinely don't know what Chloe's life looks like now. Don't know what happened with the guy from the apartment complex. Don't know if she's with someone, how everything shook out for her, any of it. She reached out once more, months after the Instagram thing, from what was clearly a different number. I could tell from the opening line. I didn't respond. That chapter closed a long time ago. Some things just run their course. And sometimes, on the other side of the worst version of something, you end up somewhere better than you ever would have built on purpose. Look, I'll be real. This guy wasn't perfect. He ignored the early signs longer than he should have, spent months convincing himself the gut feeling was something else, let it drag longer than it needed to. But when he had enough, he moved cleanly. No begging, no bargaining, no 3-week drawn-out conversation. She told him to be grateful for getting cheated on, and he walked straight out the door. And that woman who was absolutely certain he'd be back in a week? She spent 10 minutes staring at a typing indicator and couldn't finish a sentence. Drop a comment. What would you have done with that final message? And if you're not subscribed yet, hit the button. There's a lot more where this came from.